awakening is about the realization of how many great things that we have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So typically when we wake up, there's one or two top questions that we have. Why am I not married? Why don't I have kids? Or why is my family not doing great? Or why don't I have a job? Why don't I have enough money? Or something like that. We're thinking about some sort of problem that we typically wake up. And we don't realize that all the amazing things that we have that we didn't have to ask for, that we didn't really have to strive for, and this just exists for us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we haven't really earned it, we really don't deserve it, but Allah has given these things to us. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts around this notion of the focus question or the big question that we all usually wake up with.
Yeah, I think I just want to take a moment to think a little bit about the awakening, because I think like we're living in an era today where there's a lot of talk about being woke, right? And this whole movement around wokeness and stuff. And I think that any of us that started maybe to practice Islam, maybe we didn't, there's this awakening that happens. There's this realization that we come to at some point in our life. And I think this awakening is a huge, huge thing. Like even as we're recording this podcast, I just saw the whole thing around Andrew Tate becoming Muslim. He's accepted Islam, right? So there's a massive amount of awakening that happens when you go from a non-Muslim to a Muslim. But the same thing happens to a lot of practicing Muslims who, at the start of their life, maybe they weren't so much into Islam. So I think the awakening as a whole is a really, really big, important topic. And I think something that we should all be thinking about, because I think as you go on in life, sometimes what happens is that you become stale. Like, if you've been practicing 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's kind of like you need another awakening, because it's been like 2, 3, 4 years where you've been in the mode. And I remember what it was like for me when I first started practicing. You're thinking about, how amazing it feels to pray to Allah, how amazing it feels to learn about Allah, how amazing it is to worship Allah in all these different ways. But then as it becomes more routine, it starts to kind of like get stale. And so I think having that reawakening is really, really important. So for me, it's really interesting, not only the feelings around the awakening, but how we then gonna reawaken ourselves. And I think some of the points that you're bringing up, they're really good in terms of like realizing, uh, I guess awakening part of it, would you say, is to do with seeing, not just in the sense of sight, but actually your heart and your mind seeing and realizing certain things.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that's actually will be one of the topics that we'll have in one of the future episodes, with the state of what's called the basira in Arabic. It's like you actually seeing through, right? And for sure, I think that's maybe one can argue like maybe a deeper state. But picking up off your point about reawakening, I think that's really a good point, because you have these different layers. One is like, you're coming back from, totally maybe a heedless life to something, and then or you have already been awakened and then you have had really high levels of iman and focus dropping down, right? And I think both of these are really, really important, and hopefully some of our work with the transformation series will be helpful in that. Because one thing I realized that when I started practicing or going to consciously going to study circles and circles of knowledge and what have you, one thing I realized is that the books that we were studying, or that the halakha and what have you, and I would see people that are in those circles and they're going through the same books, and they have already gone through this book like 5 times. I'm like, bro, why are you here? Right. So I had this notion of that, okay, it's just like learning and then that's it. And then you move on. Right. And then he's like, I don't think you understand what seeking knowledge means. And so that was or something to that effect. And that comment stuck with me. I realized that, look, it's not something that you are done with. And then you need those sort of reminders. And as I was reading and looking forward to having this discussion with you, that was like, these are things that you have learned and you've seen before, but just like revisiting it and thinking about it, and you realize that, what, I don't do that anymore, or I've forgotten that practice, or I've forgotten that habit, and then it kind of reawakens you. So I think that's a really good point about.
And this is a big thing you've just said, actually, which is the whole thing around the relationship between knowledge and implementing the knowledge. Because in a way, you're right. Like you might read a book, right, and then you're like, why would you read a book again, type of thing. But the whole objective is for it to move you to do something, so that it benefits you in your life. And a lot of the time, like I read a lot of books, right, audio books mostly, and as you go through them, you're like on this race where you're just going from one to the other, to the other, to the other. But it's so true. Like the whole objective of the knowledge is to bring you closer to Allah, is to move you, is to have influence over you. So it is possible that you could read one book and then you could read that same book again and it could do the same thing for you, you know? And that's why, like, it's true. Like when I think about some of the audiobook that I really, really enjoy that are really beneficial, I've listened to them multiple times, and each time I've got something more from it. And the Quran is the ultimate book. And so when you get into the Quran, it's gonna be a whole nother level of benefit that just keeps coming and coming and coming. And I think this is the thing that we kind of need that awakening every day. And this is what I like what you were saying at the start about like having a daily thing where you're kind of waking up. Like, what do you wake up with? What question do you wake up with? Like, do you have this kind of notion of, my life's so messed up because of X, Y, Z reason? Like, is that what you're waking up with, right? Or are you waking up with my life's so amazing because of X, Y, Z reason? You know. So there's a lot here in terms of like, can you have that awakening every day? Or is it
Mhm.
something that comes, when you nearly die, may Allah protect us, or something big happens?